Before we begin, if you're a leader who wants to protect your decision quality, energy, and long-term performance, everything I referenced today is linked in the show notes. You'll find the Executive Capacity Audit, the waitlist for the Strategic Longevity Collective, and my ebook, Longevity Unlocked, The Genesis. Welcome to Longevity Unlocked. I'm Sherri Austin, registered nurse, executive longevity and performance advisor, and this podcast is for leaders who refuse to trade their health, clarity, or decision quality for success. Because here's the truth, most leadership conversations miss. Performance is biological. Your ability to think strategically, regulate stress, and make high-stakes decisions is directly shaped by sleep, metabolic health, recovery, and nervous system stability. But in modern leadership culture, capacity erosion often happens quietly. Nothing appears broken, yet decision quality slowly declines. Clarity fades, energy becomes inconsistent, and over time, leaders begin operating far below the level of their potential actually allows. This podcast changed that. Each episode explores the physiology of leadership performance, how sleep, stress, nutrition, movement, and recovery shape cognitive capacity, emotional regulation, and long-term resilience. Because sustainable leadership isn't about pushing harder, it's about protecting the biological systems that make high performance possible. If you're a leader who knows there's more available, more clarity, more energy, and greater strategic depth, you're in the right place. Before we dive deeper, here's what I hope you take away from today's conversation. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer understanding of how success quietly reshapes identity and why so many high performers eventually feel misaligned with lives they once worked hard to build. And more importantly, you'll have a few questions that can help you reconnect ambition with meaning. There's a moment that many high performers experience at some point in their careers. It doesn't usually happen early. It often happens somewhere in the middle. You've built a successful life. Your career is stable. You've achieved goals that once felt incredibly important. And yet one day you look around and think something's slightly strange. Why doesn't this feel the way I expected it to? Nothing is obviously wrong. Your career may even be going well, but internally something feels misaligned. This moment confuses many people because success is supposed to feel satisfying, but sometimes success reveals something unexpected. The person who set the goal is not the same person who achieved it. And when that happens, what you're experiencing isn't failure, it's identity drift. Let me start with a story. I once worked with a leader, we'll call her Melissa, who built an incredibly impressive career. She had climbed the leadership ladder inside a large organization. Her influence was growing, her responsibilities were significant, and externally, everything about her career looked like success. But during one conversation, she said something that caught my attention. She said, if I were starting my career today, I'm not sure I would have chose this path. Now that statement surprised her as much as it surprised me because she wasn't unhappy. She wasn't burned out in the traditional sense, but she had quietly outgrown the identity that originally drove her ambition. Earlier in her career, she loved competition and rapid advancement, but over time, her values had shifted. She cared more about impact, more about mentorship, more about meaningful work than status. The career she had built still worked, but it was built by a previous version of herself, and that is one of the clearest examples of identity drift. Before we go further, it's helpful to understand what the research tells us about this. Psychologists who study career development talk about something called identity formation. In early adulthood, people often build their identities around goals, achievement, recognition, professional advancement. But identity doesn't remain static. As people accumulate experiences, their priorities change. What motivates someone at 25 is rarely identical to what motivates them at 40. The challenge is that careers often move faster than identity reflection. Responsibilities accumulate, opportunities appear, promotions happen. And many people continue following a trajectory long after their internal motivations have evolved. That gap between the identity that built your career and the identity you're becoming is where identity drift forms. I remember encountering a version of this moment myself. There was a time when I spent years working toward a particular professional milestone. It had been a goal for a long time, and when I finally achieved it, I expected the moment to feel deeply satisfying. Instead, something unexpected happened. The achievement felt quiet, not disappointing, but not energizing either. And that moment forced me to confront something important. The version of me who set that goal had different motivations, different fears, different definitions of success. In the years it took to achieve it, I had evolved, but the goal had not. And I realized something that many ambitious people eventually learn. Sometimes you achieve something that once mattered deeply, only to discover you've grown beyond it. Another example of identity drift comes from someone who built a company from the ground up. This founder has spent a decade building a successful business. The company grew, the team expanded. The organization reached a level of stability most founders dream about. But once the company reached maturity, he realized something surprising. He didn't enjoy operating the company as much as he had enjoyed building it. His identity had been shaped by the builder phase, but the role he now held required a completely different identity, that of an operator. And the misalignment between those two identities created tension. He hadn't lost his ability, he had simply evolved beyond the role he once loved. Once he recognized that, he redesigned his role and brought in a COO to run the operations. The company thrived, and he returned to the work that energized him most, innovation and growth. Before we go further, it's helpful to understand what the research tells us about this. Research in motivation psychology consistently shows that meaning and autonomy become stronger drivers of fulfillment as people mature. Earlier in careers, external awards, promotions, compensation, recognition, that often dominates motivation. Later, intrinsic drivers become more important: purpose, impact, alignment with values. When people continue pursuing external success metrics long after intrinsic motivations have evolved, a quiet dissatisfaction often appears. Not because the career is wrong, but because the identity driving the career has changed. I remember a moment in my own work when I started noticing this pattern. One of the most interesting patterns I observed among leaders is how rarely they pause to update their identity intentionally. And I'm guilty of this. Many people update strategy in their organizations every year. They revisit goals, they reassess priorities, but they rarely do the same thing with their personal identity. And over time, that lack of reflection can create a strange experience. You wake up one day realizing you're living a life designed by someone you used to be. Identity drift isn't necessarily a problem. In many ways, it's a sign of growth. The challenge isn't that identity changes. The challenge is when identity changes without reflection. So here are 3 questions worth asking yourself periodically. First, if I restarted my career today, would I pursue the same direction? I didn't. Second, what problems energize me now that didn't interest me 5 years ago? And what parts of my current life feel inherited from a past version of myself? Because ambition builds lives, but reflection makes sure those lives still fit the person you've become. And sometimes the most important career decision isn't changing what you do, it's updating who you are becoming. As you reflect on today's conversation, consider this: success changes who we become, but identity rarely updates automatically. So here's the question worth asking yourself this week. Is the life you're building still aligned with the person you're becoming? If today's conversation made you think about someone you lead or work alongside, consider sharing this episode with them. Many of the challenges leaders face, burnout, decision fatigue, identity drift, are things people rarely talk about openly. Sometimes the most valuable leadership conversations begin simply by sharing an idea. Before we wrap up, take a moment to reflect on what stood out most in today's conversation. Leadership performance isn't built in dramatic moments. It's shaped by the small systems you practice every day. If today's episode resonated with you, you'll find several resources in the show notes to help you go deeper. That includes the executive capacity audit, which help leaders evaluate the biological and cognitive factors influencing their performance. You'll also find the waitlist for the Strategic Longevity Collective, where I work directly with leaders who want to protect their decision quality, resilience, and long-term leadership capacity. And if you'd like to explore the deeper philosophy behind this work, you can download my ebook, Longevity Unlocked: The Genesis. And if you haven't already, follow the show so you don't miss future episodes. Until next time, protect your energy, protect your clarity, and lead for the long term.